Hi. As you're about to see, business buyer behaviour seems to be well understood by people in the field and really poorly understood by those who presume to teach them. I'll show you what I mean by that in a moment. Guys, it's not that hard. I'll show you now a framework for understanding business buyer behaviour that you can use in the field and you can teach with. There are three big frames you need to have in your mind. Number one, how mature is the market? Are we at a stage where in the market's development we'll mostly be selling to early adopters or pragmatists who are a little nervous and need a push, or confident pragmatists who need to understand your product, or infrastructure buyers who need you to comply, or what I call blind buyers, which is basically at the very end of a market, often the laggards aren't even buying at all, they're somehow getting drawn into some other purchase that happens to include your product. That framework is really important because the way that they will behave will be fundamentally different as a general block of buyers. So that's the market as a whole. Then who does this problem most affect in each business? That is, who's going to light the fire? And who else will get involved? And in what roles? So business by business, who's going to get involved and why? And then finally, how will each of those buying influencers navigate from not being interested to absolute support? We went searching for some online articles to help in today's show, and what we found was mostly rubbish. I did manage to extract some nuggets though, so bear with me. I'll go fairly quick in the review in this week's show because there's not a lot of gold, but I will pull out a few nuggets and then tie it all together for you at the end into a three-part framework for understanding business buyer behaviour. So this is the first article that we came across from knowthis.com. It's an academic treatise and it's based on a fallacy that businesses either sell to consumers or they sell to businesses who do. That's just not true. Some B2B chains go 20, 30 deep, and then you might get a consumer at point 20 or 30, but then you might get a business after that. So to suggest that the consumer is at the end of that chain, I think is a fallacy. It reminds me of that wonderful piece of logic in the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, where you can mount an argument that every word in English comes from Greek. Or in this case, that ultimately demand always hinges on consumers. There is a useful definition of buying roles, though, if you wade through it, if you can be bothered. Another not great one. This is written in poor English and it makes assertions of general truths that are only occasionally correct. So careful. But it does a good job of describing why multiple buying influencers are involved in complex buying decisions and therefore in complex sales. To that end, it is useful. Our third article, Principles of Marketing from Zepedia.com. I would make a general point about this. It's just universally awful. It's a theoretical model of the buying process and it's not about behaviour at all. And as a practicing marketer or salesperson, there's little practical application. It reminds me, frankly, of why I hated university. Studies from texts written by academics referencing each other's work and never actually applying their models to the real world. Clearly not a fan, in case you didn't get that hint. Fourth one we found. Look, despite its title, Stages of Business Buying, which it does, by the way, it honours its title. Believe it or not, that's a rare thing. Despite its title, it also does go into a bit about behaviour, and in particular, if you like, risk aversion and problem identification, or risk avoidance. It also shows a greater understanding of real-world issues that sales and marketing professionals face, and to that extent, quite useful. Now, our next article, sorry, somehow I found my way to the bottom. It's we use this one because it's been shared so often, 426 times on LinkedIn and 530 times on Twitter. So you obviously liked it. Look, it's a consumer article and therefore relevance to you as a B2B buyer, not so much, but there were actually a couple of good points. It flags two important shifts that affect us as B2B marketers just as much as it affects consumer marketers. First one is that digital marketing requires us to think about a richer engagement, not just blasting content out through digital. And the second one is that users switch devices many times. And so we can't anymore say that we need multi-channel and think, therefore, if John's using mobile and Sally's using desktop, that's okay. No, John's actually using mobile, then desktop, then mobile, then desktop. That's the point made in this article, and I think that's a helpful contribution. Okay, I'll give you my spin shortly, but let me first honour what I think we just saw from those 5 articles. I'll be brief. Well, there are really 4 points. Complex, important decisions involve many players from different functions. Those players each assume different roles in the buying process. There might be users, influencers, buyers, deciders, or gatekeepers, and they each play a different role. Here's my list below. In fact, excuse me, that's not my list. Here's the list from the authors below. Buyers, each of them, work through identifiable stages. They recognise the problem, then they develop specifications to solve the problem, you could call that need, then they search for and evaluate possible products and suppliers, then they select a product and supplier, order, you might say there's stages in between, but I'm okay with these 4 stages, and then the 5th, they evaluate the product and supplier performance, considering future purchases. I reckon that's a pretty good list, and that digital plays a key role across the buyer's journey, and it's now not just multi-platform, but it's multi-platform for each user. Bit of a complexity there. Okay, what I'm going to suggest doesn't actually disagree with any of that, but I think I want to frame it quite differently. Start by looking at your whole market. Is the part of the market who's ready to buy right now really only the early adopters, in which case your language is going to need to be about creating opportunity, getting ahead of your competition. That is going to affect their behaviour too. They're going to be willing to jump as soon as they smell a great opportunity. Or are we kind of finished with the early adopters and we run out of early adopters, and now we have to sell to the somewhat nervous pragmatists? Their behaviour is going to be fundamentally different. They're going to really need a nudge. Or are we dealing with the less nervous pragmatists in what Geoffrey Moore calls the tornado, where they don't need to be persuaded to buy the product or a product, they need to be persuaded to buy your product? Really different behaviour. Or is it now a more mature stage where this product or service is being bought by infrastructure buyers, you know, IT, HR, finance, typical infrastructure buyers? Again, different behaviour. They'll be more procedure driven. Or is it really just the very end of the market where the only people buying the product are those that don't even know they're buying the product because they're buying it wrapped up in somebody else's product? That's kind of how laggards buy. They actually don't buy. They just somehow buy something else that includes your product or service. So, first frame, really understand where your overall market's at. They will behave differently. Secondly, identify who's going to light the fire. That is, who does this problem most affect? Most marketers who I talk to think their problem is really the CEO's problem, and it really is. Who in the business is going to be most troubled about the problem that you're in the business of solving? Because that's who's going to light the fire inside their business. Who's that? And who else will get involved in the decision? We know there's many. And then finally, third piece is, how will each of those users navigate from, do we really need to do this, through to, I'm on board, and I'm on board with you. It's that bit I want to quickly dive into now. I'm not going to take long, but I want to give you a framework for thinking about that last piece, just as a little bit of extra for you today. In the beginning, most of the buying influencers, whether they're the one who lights the fire or they're playing some other role as a buying influence. By the way, quick one. I'm going to refer you not to the article that I just read through, but to Miller Hyman's articulation of buying influences. I think it's far more useful. I'll put a link in the show notes. Now, regardless of which buying influence we're talking about, in the beginning, they don't believe there's a problem. They're untroubled about the problem, they're unaware you can solve it, and they just don't care. And at some point they might be interested, maybe because they're the one who's interested, or maybe because a colleague got them interested. For the moment, don't care. Then at some point they acknowledge not only that there is a problem, but that your version of the problem is what they should be focused on solving. That's if you're managing the dialogue well. If you're not, then they've got somebody else's version of the problem, and that's not to your advantage. So we definitely want them to be worried about the way we think the problem ought to be solved. Then there's, now I know what I need. Then, now I understand your offer, probably as well as others, and then I prefer yours, and then I've made a decision to buy or support yours. That journey, we call it the buyer's journey, is a term I coined in 2003 in The Leaky Funnel. in that book, what I was explaining was kind of how our companies plan go-to-market strategies. And I coined the term the buyer's journey to describe that basic process. So you want to understand business buyer behaviour, you need those three things. You need firstly to understand how the overall market's thinking. Then you need to work out who's going to light the fire and else is going to get involved. And then you need to understand how each of those is going to move through their journey, and it's using those stages. Here's the image again of the buyer's journey, using those stages in the journey. So therefore our tactics and our measurement need to support that journey. Look, I had a lot of fun today. I hope you got a lot out of it as well. If you did, then the odds are probably pretty good that you'll enjoy other articles that we produce. We do a show every week, and you can find it either at youtube.com/mathmarketing, here are the links, or at mathmarketing.com/blog. Now, if you've already done that, fantastic, thanks, welcome aboard. Next request is go check out Funnel Plan. Go to funnelplan.com and check it out. If you're watching this before the middle of April 2016, then there's just a waiting list there for people who can get told about when the product's going to be released in the general public. If you're watching this after April 2016 or after the middle of April 2016, then you're going to find there all the details that you need about the product, including how to get access to a free version of the product. So check it out at funnelplan.com. It's all about planning, mindful of market maturity, finding the key buying influences, and then choosing tactics to help them work through that journey and therefore managing business buyer behaviour, not just observing it. That's it for this week. Hope you got a lot out of that. Until next week, loads more lined up. Until then, may your funnel be full and always flowing. So thanks this week to Jackie Tran for research, to our 5 sources. Know This, Management Study Guide, Zapier, let me say that again, Zapedia, Boundless, Sojin O, Miller Heiman for the buying influences, I promised you that link, Annika Dobby for her amazing production, thanks Annika. My name's Hugh McFarlane and it's my absolute pleasure to have scripted and presented this week's show.